The construction site hummed under a gray, overcast sky, scaffolding casting jagged shadows across the muddy ground, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and metal. Marcus Tate stood tall, his muscular frame wrapped in a dirt-streaked white shirt, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders, a hard hat tilted slightly on his head, its blue surface scuffed from years of wear. His commanding presence silenced the crew, their chatter dying down as they hammered nails and hauled wooden planks, the rhythm of their work a steady heartbeat against the looming storm. Marcus's dark eyes scanned the site, his stern leadership style etched into every deliberate step he took. He adjusted his gloves, the leather creaking softly, when Ethan Carver strode forward, his suit pristine, a white hard hat gleaming like a badge of superiority, the kind of shine that screamed he'd never lifted a brick in his life. Ethan's sharp voice sliced through the air, cutting through the clatter of tools. "You think you run this place, Tate? A nobody in a dirty shirt?" The crew froze, their movements halting mid-swing, eyes darting between the two men, tension coiling tight like a spring about to snap. Marcus's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists, a worn photo peeking from his pocket, a fleeting glimpse of a younger him, smiling with a small boy, both in hard hats, the edges of the picture frayed from years of being carried close. Ethan smirked, his lips curling with disdain, and pointed with a sneer, his finger jabbing the air. "Get him out of here, can't have some lowlife calling the shots." Laughter erupted, harsh and cutting, rippling through the crew like a wave, their orange vests glowing under the dim light, their faces a mix of amusement and unease. A worker, broad-shouldered with a yellow hard hat, hesitated, his hammer dangling in his hand, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Then, with a glance at Ethan, he stepped forward and shoved Marcus toward the edge of the site, the force sending him stumbling over a pile of loose gravel. Dust swirled around him, coating his already stained shirt, as he caught himself against a wooden plank, the rough grain biting into his palm. The photo slipped from his pocket, landing face up in the dirt, the small boy's smile staring up at the sky. The crew turned away, their orange vests fading into the blur of activity, leaving Marcus isolated, the sound of their laughter echoing in his ears. Ethan's voice lingered, cold and triumphant, as he adjusted his cufflinks, the silver flashing under the gray light. "That's where trash belongs." Marcus knelt slowly, his fingers brushing the photo, the paper crinkling under his touch as rain began to speckle his face, tiny droplets catching in his eyelashes. His chest tightened, a sharp ache spreading as he stared at the image, the boy's bright eyes, the hard hat too big for his small head, the memory of a life before everything fell apart. The rain grew heavier, each drop a cold pinprick against his skin, soaking into the dirt around the photo, threatening to blur the ink. He scooped it up, cradling it gently, his thumb wiping away a smudge of mud, his movements reverent, as if the picture held his entire world. The crew's laughter faded into the background, replaced by the steady patter of rain on the scaffolding, the metal creaking ominously overhead. Marcus stood, his broad shoulders hunching slightly, the weight of Ethan's words pressing down harder than the storm. His dark eyes burned with a quiet storm, a fire that flickered beneath the surface, restrained but unyielding. He tucked the photo back into his pocket, his fingers lingering on the frayed edges, a silent promise to the boy in the picture. The sight buzzed on, oblivious to the man standing at its edge, the man they dismissed as nothing. But they didn't know, the truth would turn this humiliation into his downfall. Marcus stood at the edge of the construction site, rain streaking down his face, blending with the dirt on his white shirt, the fabric clinging heavily to his muscular frame. The gray sky hung low, its weight pressing against the scaffolding, each droplet a cold whisper against his skin as it pooled in the muddy ground beneath his boots. He clutched the worn photo in his pocket, the edges rough against his trembling fingers, the image of his son, a small boy in an oversized hard hat, grinning with innocent pride, etched into his mind like a scar. The rain intensified, drumming on the metal framework overhead, a relentless rhythm that drowned out the distant clatter of tools. Marcus leaned against a wooden plank, its rough grain biting into his palm, the cold seeping through the damp fabric to chill his bones. His breath came in shallow bursts, uneven and ragged, as if the air itself resisted him. The sight buzzed faintly around him, workers in orange vests hauling planks and hammering nails, their movements a blur through the downpour, but none dared meet his gaze. He was alone, isolated by the sting of Ethan's words still ringing in his ears. Nobody, lowlife, trash, a verbal blow that cut deeper than the shove that had sent him stumbling. His chest tightened, a sharp ache spreading like wildfire, pulling him back to a time before the pain had carved lines into his face. The boy in the photo had been his world, his son, lost years ago in a site accident, a collapse of beams and dreams, a moment that had shattered Marcus's life. He'd been a different man then, full of hope, building this company from nothing with calloused hands and a heart full of promises. Every nail driven, every blueprint drawn, had been for his son, a tribute to the future they'd never share. His fingers tightened around the photo, the frayed edges digging into his palm, a silent scream of everything he'd lost, laughter, bedtime stories, the weight of a small hand in his. The rain washed over him, soaking his hard hat, dripping into his eyes, but he didn't move. The stern leadership he'd cultivated, the commanding presence that had earned him respect, felt like a hollow shell now. Ethan's sneer had stripped it away, leaving him raw and exposed. He closed his eyes, the ache in his chest deepening, a raw wound reopening as memories flooded back, his son's voice calling him, Dad, the day he'd placed that first tiny hard hat on his head, the silence that followed the accident. I was someone once, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm, a confession lost to the wind. The words tasted bitter, a truth he'd buried beneath years of hard work and quiet resolve. He'd risen from the ashes of that loss, built an empire to prove his worth, to honor a boy who'd never see it. But standing here, mud caking his boots, rain plastering his shirt to his skin, he wasn't sure anymore. The photo crinkled in his grip, a lifeline to a past that felt more real than the present. A young worker in a blue hard hat paused nearby, his figure a shadow through the rain, watching silently with a tool dangling in his hand. Marcus didn't notice, lost in the weight of his own doubt. The crew moved on, their orange vests glowing faintly against the gray, their indifference a mirror to his isolation. He slid down the plank, sitting in the mud, the cold seeping into his bones as the rain battered his hat. The sight felt foreign now, a place that had once been his kingdom, now a battlefield where he'd been cast out. His son's face stared up from the photo in his mind, those bright eyes asking why he'd let this happen. Had he failed? Had all the years of sacrifice been for nothing? The question lingered, sharp and unrelenting, cutting through the storm's roar. The young worker stepped closer, his boots squelching in the mud, but Marcus's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, the pain in his heart a storm of its own. What had he become? The rain softened to a drizzle, a thin mist rising from the muddy ground as Marcus sat against the wooden plank, his dirt-streaked shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. The construction site hummed faintly, the clatter of tools resuming, orange vests moving like ghosts through the gray haze. His fingers rested on the photo in his pocket, the frayed edges a quiet comfort, though his dark eyes stared blankly at the horizon, lost in the ache of his son's memory. The cold had settled deep, numbing his hands, but his mind churned with the weight of Ethan's words. A young worker in a blue hard hat lingered nearby, his tool belt jingling softly as he adjusted a hammer, his gaze fixed on Marcus with a curiosity that cut through the mist. The boy's brow furrowed, his young face framed by damp hair, as if piecing together a puzzle. He'd seen the photo fall earlier, caught the way Marcus cradled it like a lifeline, and now he noticed the glint of metal on Marcus's wrist, a watch, its face scratched, initials etched faintly into the band. The boy tilted his head, the name stirring something deep, a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. Ethan's voice boomed across the site, sharp and commanding, directing the crew to reinforce a shaky scaffold. The boy glanced toward him, then back at Marcus, his lips pressing into a thin line. The air thickened, the drizzle catching on the scaffolding overhead, dripping in steady plinks that echoed like a heartbeat. Marcus shifted, his boots sinking deeper into the mud, the photo crinkling as he adjusted his grip. The boy took a hesitant step closer, his blue hard hat catching a sliver of light, his eyes tracing the watch again. He'd heard stories, whispers among the older workers about a man who'd built this place from nothing, a man whose son had been lost to a tragedy years ago. The initials on the watch, MT, matched the rumors, a detail that lodged in his mind like a splinter. He wiped rain from his face, his breath visible in the cool air, and glanced at Ethan laughing with another worker, oblivious to the scene unfolding. The site stretched out around them, wooden planks stacked high, the gray sky pressing down like a lid on a boiling pot. Marcus's shoulders slumped, the weight of his isolation pressing harder, but the boy's presence lingered, a quiet observer in the chaos. A gust of wind carried the scent of wet wood, rustling the boy's vest as he shifted his weight, his gaze darting between Marcus and the watch. He remembered his own father, a quiet man who'd worn a similar timepiece, lost to illness years back, and the memory tightened his chest. Marcus stood slowly, brushing mud from his knees, the photo tucked safely back, his movements deliberate despite the exhaustion in his frame. The boy's eyes followed, catching the way Marcus's hand lingered on the pocket, a gesture that spoke of loss and resolve. Ethan's laughter faded into the distance, the crew's work a steady rhythm, but the boy's doubt grew, a seed planted in the drizzle. He adjusted his gloves, the leather squeaking, and turned away, the watch's initials burning in his mind. Who was this man really? The drizzle thickened again, blurring the edges of the site, the scaffolding looming like silent sentinels. Marcus walked toward a stack of planks, his boots leaving deep prints in the mud, each step a battle against the doubt gnawing at him. The boy watched from afar, his young face shadowed by the hard hat, his thoughts racing. He'd overheard Ethan mocking Marcus earlier, the words cruel and unearned, and now this watch, this photo, hinted at a story deeper than the surface. The crew moved on, their voices a low murmur, but the boy stayed rooted, his gaze lingering on Marcus's retreating figure. A drop of rain slid down his cheek, mimicking the tear he'd seen in Marcus's eye earlier, and he clenched his fist, the hammer's handle cool against his palm. The site felt alive with secrets, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan called out again, his tone impatient, but the boy ignored him, his mind fixed on the man who'd been cast aside. What was Marcus hiding behind that quiet strength? The question hung in the mist, unanswered, as the drizzle painted the world in shades of gray. The drizzle turned to a steady rain, soaking the construction site as Marcus walked toward the center, his boots sinking into the mud with each determined step. The crew's chatter faded, replaced by the rhythmic patter of rain on the scaffolding, the gray sky casting a dim glow over the wooden planks and steel beams. He stopped near Ethan, who was barking orders at a group of workers, his suit now speckled with mud, his white hard hat tilted arrogantly. Marcus's dark eyes locked onto him, a quiet storm brewing behind his steady gaze. The crew sensed the shift, their movements slowing, hammers pausing mid-swing as they turned to watch. Marcus reached into his pocket, past the worn photo, and pulled out a small tablet, its screen glowing faintly through the rain. "You sabotaged the beams last week," he said, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade, steady and unyielding. Ethan's smirk vanished, his face paling as Marcus tapped the screen, revealing grainy footage. Ethan, alone at night, loosening bolts on a critical support beam, his movements deliberate and sly. Gasps rippled through the crew, their eyes widening in slow motion, the rain seeming to freeze in the air as the truth unfolded. Ethan stumbled back, his polished shoes slipping in the mud, his arrogance dissolving into panic. I didn't, he stammered, but Marcus stepped closer, his presence towering despite the dirt on his shirt. "You thought I wouldn't see?" Marcus's tone was ironclad, each word a hammer strike, his hard hat dripping with rain as he held the tablet higher for all to see. The crew murmured, their orange vests a stark contrast to the gray backdrop, their faces a mix of shock and dawning respect. Ethan's hands shook, his cufflinks catching the dim light as he reached out, desperate. "Kate, listen," but Marcus cut him off, his voice rising above the storm. "You're fired, right here, right now." The words echoed across the site, sharp and final, the crew falling silent as if the rain itself had paused to listen. A worker dropped his tool, the clatter of metal on wood punctuating the stillness, the sound ringing in slow motion as Ethan's face twisted in disbelief. Marcus stood firm, his broad shoulders squared, the tablet still glowing in his hand, the evidence undeniable. The young worker in the blue hard hat stepped closer, his eyes wide, the initials on Marcus's watch now making sense. MT, Marcus Tate, the man who'd built this empire from nothing, a name whispered in reverence by the old-timers. The crew shifted, their loyalty flipping in an instant, their gazes turning cold on Ethan. Rain streamed down Marcus's face, mixing with the dirt, but his dignity shone through, a beacon in the storm. Ethan fell to his knees, mud splattering his pristine suit, his hard hat tumbling into a puddle, the white surface now smeared with defeat. The sight seemed to hold its breath, the scaffolding creaking softly, a witness to the reversal of power. Marcus turned away, his boots splashing through the mud, his chest rising with a deep breath as the weight of humiliation lifted, replaced by a quiet resolve. The crew parted for him, their heads dipping in respect, their earlier laughter a distant memory. The rain fell harder, washing the sight clean, the gray sky a canvas for Marcus's reclaimed strength. Ethan stayed on his knees, his head bowed, the tablet's glow reflecting in the puddle beside him, a mirror to his downfall. The young worker clutched his hammer, his young face alight with awe, the photo Marcus had held earlier now a symbol of something greater. The site buzzed with a new energy, the workers resuming their tasks, but their movements carried a newfound reverence. Marcus stopped at the edge of the scaffold, his hand brushing the pocket where the photo rested, a silent promise to his son fulfilled. The rain continued to fall, a steady curtain that seemed to cleanse the past, but the crew's whispers grew. What else did Marcus carry in that quiet strength? The question lingered, as the storm painted the world in shades of redemption. The rain slowed to a gentle patter, the construction site settling into an uneasy stillness as Marcus stood at the scaffold's edge, his broad frame silhouetted against the gray sky. The tablet in his hand dimmed, the footage of Ethan's sabotage no longer playing, its glow replaced by the faint shimmer of raindrops on his hard hat. Ethan remained on his knees in the mud, his pristine suit now a patchwork of dirt and shame, his white hard hat lying abandoned in a puddle nearby. The crew watched in silence, their orange vests catching the muted light, their earlier mockery replaced by a heavy quiet. Ethan's hands trembled as he looked up, his sharp features softened by defeat, rain streaking down his face like tears he wouldn't shed. "Tate," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Marcus turned slowly, his dark eyes steady but not cruel, the photo in his pocket a quiet anchor against the storm of emotions inside him. He raised a hand, not in anger, but to silence Ethan's plea, the gesture carrying a weight that needed no words. The young worker in the blue hard hat stepped closer, his boots squelching softly in the mud, his young face a mixture of awe and guilt for having laughed earlier. The crew shifted, their tools hanging loosely in their hands, their breaths visible in the cool air as they waited for Marcus's response. But Marcus didn't speak, his silence louder than any reprimand, his stern leadership now a quiet strength that spoke of battles fought and won. Ethan wiped mud from his cheek, his movements slow, his arrogance stripped away as he stood, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he muttered, the words barely audible over the dripping rain, his eyes darting to the crew, who turned away, their loyalty now firmly with Marcus. A worker helped Ethan gather his things, the gesture more pity than kindness, and Ethan stumbled toward the site's exit, his once confident stride reduced to a shuffle. Marcus exhaled, the tension in his chest easing as he watched Ethan go, the rain washing away the last traces of the confrontation. He didn't need to lash out, didn't need to gloat, his dignity had been reclaimed in the truth, in the way the crew now looked at him, their heads dipping in quiet respect. The young worker approached, his hammer dangling at his side, his eyes downcast as if searching for the right words. The air grew still, the scaffolding above them gleaming wetly, the sight holding its breath in a moment of raw clarity. Marcus placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a small gesture that carried the weight of forgiveness, his calloused fingers steady against the boy's orange vest. The crew resumed their work, the sound of hammers and saws filling the air, but their movements were slower, more deliberate, as if processing the lesson etched into the mud. The drizzle caught the light, casting a soft glow over the site, the gray sky softening at the edges as if the storm had finally spent its fury. Marcus turned back to the scaffold, his boots leaving deep prints in the mud, each step a testament to the strength he'd held on to despite everything. The young worker lingered, watching Marcus's retreating figure, his young face etched with a new understanding. Power wasn't in a suit or a title, but in the quiet resolve Marcus carried. The crew's whispers faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of work, the site coming alive again under Marcus's unspoken leadership. Ethan's apology hung in the air, a faint echo, but Marcus had already moved past it, his focus on the planks ahead, on the future he was still building. The rain dripped from his hard hat, a steady rhythm that matched his heartbeat, a man who'd risen above the humiliation without lowering himself to vengeance. The young worker tightened his grip on his hammer, his gaze lingering on Marcus, a question forming in his mind: what had shaped this man into someone so unyielding yet so just? The answer, he sensed, lay in the photo Marcus guarded so closely. The sun broke through the gray clouds, casting golden rays across the construction site, the wet scaffolding glinting like a promise of renewal. Marcus stood near the scaffold's edge, his dirt-streaked shirt drying in the warm light, his broad shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. The crew moved with renewed energy, their orange vests a vibrant contrast to the softening sky, hammers striking wood with a steady rhythm. The young worker in the blue hard hat approached, his boots crunching on the damp ground, his young face alight with a quiet reverence. He held out a hammer, its handle worn but sturdy, and met Marcus's gaze. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight beyond his years, a recognition of the lesson etched into the morning's events. Marcus took the hammer, his calloused fingers brushing the boy's, and a small smile creased his face, the first hint of warmth breaking through his stern exterior. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the worn photo, the edges softened by time and rain. The image of his son smiled up at him, a memory that once brought pain now stirring a quiet resolve. Marcus held it out to the boy, his hand steady despite the ache in his chest. "Keep it safe," he said, his voice warm, a father's trust passing to this new generation. The boy nodded, cradling the photo gently, his eyes wide with the honor of the gesture. The crew glanced over, their work pausing briefly, as if sensing the moment's significance. Marcus turned to the horizon, the sight stretching out before him, a testament to the life he'd rebuilt after loss. The pain of his son's absence lingered, but it no longer defined him. His strength had grown from it, a quiet power that needed no words. The boy tucked the photo into his vest, his young frame standing taller as he returned to his work, the hammer swinging with new purpose. Marcus breathed deeply, the air fresh with the scent of wet wood and earth, the weight lifting from his shoulders. The crew resumed their tasks, their laughter now warm, a sound that filled the site with life. He stepped forward, his boots leaving faint prints in the mud, each step a reclaiming of the ground he'd been forced to abandon. The young worker glanced back, his smile a mirror to Marcus's past self, a connection forged in the quiet of the morning. The site felt alive again, a place of resilience and renewal, its heartbeat steady under Marcus's watchful eye. His journey from humiliation to healing was complete, a man made whole by his own resolve. What would this new day bring to the man who'd found his strength again? Marcus paused at the scaffold's edge, the golden sunlight warming the construction site, casting long shadows across the muddy ground where he'd once fallen. The crew worked steadily, their orange vests a vibrant pulse against the drying wood and steel, the air filled with the rhythmic clatter of tools. The young worker in the blue hard hat joined him, the photo tucked safely in his vest, its edges peeking out slightly. "My dad worked here too," the boy said, pointing to a faded mark on a plank, a carved initial, JT, barely visible under the grime. Marcus's eyes widened, his breath catching as he traced the letters with his gaze, the initials matching his son's name, a connection he hadn't expected. The boy smiled, unaware of the depth of the moment, his young face bright with pride. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder, the weight of the past circling back, a quiet revelation settling in his chest. The crew's laughter echoed softly, now warm and genuine, a sound that wrapped around the site like a healing balm. Marcus looked out over the horizon, the gray sky fully cleared, the future stretching before him like an unwritten promise. The boy adjusted his hard hat, mirroring Marcus's earlier stance, a new generation stepping into the legacy he'd fought to protect. The photo in the boy's vest, once a source of pain, now tied them together, a thread of resilience woven through time. Marcus exhaled, the ache of loss softening into a purpose he hadn't foreseen. The site hummed with life, the scaffold standing tall, a silent witness to his journey. He turned away, a man transformed, the past no longer a burden but a foundation. What secrets would this place still hold for those who dared to look back?